Can the
anybody
fetus
is
live on its
forced to.
own?
Um,
Your heart is the only one that will keep me alive. Do you think that you're then morally obligated to give me your heart?
Absolutely not. That seems entirely arbitrary, and science seems to indicate that that would allow for infanticide.
When we talk about rights, we don't talk about what gets rights, we talk about who gets rights. When we talk about dying, we don't talk about what dies, we talk about who died. The fetus wouldn't be alive without the mother.
Yes, it's always the oppressors who are using this blank is not a person.
Off
But what's the
things
difference, I guess?
a
They
black
just picked
person, a
something that
black
they
person,
liked.
a black person will never become white, and a fetus will develop the ability to deploy a conscious experience. If you have all the parts to build a car, you have the capacity to have a car, whether or not it's all put together as a car.
I'll concede on that it's a positive right if you want to categorize it that way.
So then why do
Um,
fetuses get the positive right where it's negative to everyone else? If you
yeah, I
yourself
would
also said that fundamental rights should be applied equally across the board, why is it different in this scenario?
illogical, unreasonable. Let's focus on the argument a lot of pro-choice people make, which is that it's just a clump of cells and the fetus isn't alive and you can't kill something that isn't alive. Science teaches without reservation that life begins at fertilization or conception. It is a scientific fact that an organism exists after fertilization that did not exist before. This new organism has its own DNA distinct from the mother and the father, meaning it is a unique person. As the embryo grows and develops a heartbeat, its own circulatory system, and its own organs. From fertilization, it is a new organism that is alive and will continue to grow and develop as long as nutrition is provided and its life is not ended through violence or illness. Now that we have defined our terms, to end my opening, I will present a syllogism for why abortion is wrong and immoral. For those who are unfamiliar with syllogisms, a syllogism is where true premises necessarily lead to a true conclusion, meaning if you accept the premises as true, the conclusion must also be true. Just a quick example of this to put it into practice if anybody's watching who's never seen one before. All men, premise one, all men die. Premise two, Socrates is a man. Conclusion, Socrates will die. If you accept that all men die and that Socrates is a man, Socrates has to die. It doesn't matter. If you disagree, then you are in conflict with reason, you are in conflict with logic, and by definition, illogical, unreasonable. So my syllogism is all human beings have the right to life. Violating a human's right to life is immoral. A, in parentheses, human, fetus is a human being. Therefore, violating a fetus's right to life is immoral. And with that, I yield my time.
I appreciate you. Thank you for the opening. Very well in depth. I'll give mine, and then, like I said, we'll jump into more of a back and forth. So obviously, I'm representing the side of pro-choice. I believe that throughout history, removing societal or fundamental rights from women has always led to a slippery slope of negative consequences. Women's suffrage, rights to own property. If you zoom out, a lot of eugenics was done this way as well. If you take away societal rights from women or fundamental right of self from anyone, it's typically always led to bad things. With abortion now, you can see these bans leading to children rape victims being forced to carry to term. Women are fleeing states to terminate non-viable pregnancies, risking death and infection if they don't. Data on the matter specifically shows that states that have these stricter laws have had a 7% increase in total maternal mortality. States with licensed physician requirements have had a 35% increase, and those with Medicaid funding restrictions have had 29% higher, all during pregnancy or within 42 days thereof. NIH researchers can predict that a total abortion ban would increase maternal death by 21 to 26%, and specifically for Black mothers, 33 to 39%. So for me, the question boils down to at what point do we protect this potential life over an existing life, and at what cost are we willing to do that? Now, to be semantically clear, I do grant that human life begins at conception, but I'm more concerned with personhood. So I only use potential there to differentiate the life of a person from human life, as I believe they're two different things, and there's no scientific consensus on the two being the same. And with a fetus, it potentially could become a person, but could in and of itself itself implies that it is not yet, while of course the mother has been and will continue to be. And things societally granted are done so to people. When we talk about rights, we don't talk about what gets rights, we talk about who gets rights. When we talk about dying, we don't talk about what dies, we talk about who died. That's because personhood is what we place a moral value on, and personhood is centered around the capacity to deploy a unique conscious experience, a human conscious experience. When we think of a person, we think of someone who's having an experience. When that conscious experience ends, that's what we consider the death of a person. So it's only right to consider the start of that conscious experience the start of a person, which begins in the cortex when it's activated by the thalamocortical connections, once the axons and dendrites are formed and synapses begin to fire throughout, which scientific consensus says cannot happen prior to 20 weeks. So for legislative purposes, I would support abortions, no questions asked, up to 20 weeks. But after that, for the obvious exceptions of the mother's life, fatal fetal anomaly, and in certain cases of rape victims as well. And to be very clear, 98.6% of abortions happen prior to this 20-week mark. 99.5% happen prior to 22 weeks, which is 2 weeks before a fetus is ever viable. But as most pro-lifers do, I'm sure my partner in this debate will do as well, is to try to define the message by the minority as intuition pumping seems to be the only ground that most pro-lifers can stand on. But I think that when it comes to fetuses, the word right is often over-applied as a way to intuition pump a level of rights that we don't even give to persons. Sure, I have the right to life, we both have the right to life, but that only includes others not interfering with the bare minimum required to live. And the question is, how much can that right supersede other people's rights to do with their body? If the only way that I could live would be for Donald Trump to fly to my house and lay his hand across my forehead, he would not have to do that. I wouldn't have the right to force him. Would he be nice if he did? I mean, sure, but what right would I have against him to force him to do this? But when it comes to fetuses, there is this level of force that comes with their prescribed rights, when in reality, not even persons have the right to use this force to live. Most people don't think that an unconscious person on end-of-life care who is only being kept alive by machines has a right to live that supersedes their family's right to end care, whether it be for trauma purposes, financial inability, or whatever. This isn't seen as a crime, even though it is a human and it is alive. That's because killing is not unjust because it ends a life. It's unjust because it ends a conscious experience. So invoking life as a justification to restrict abortion is kind of baiting the question, because you must show why it is unjust to end the life. And this is the juxtaposition that I propose with fetuses, that looking at abortion as the right to kill isn't even the right way to view the matter. It's the right of a pregnant person to not be pregnant. And typically, because pro-life people can't contend with these facts, they turn to blaming women, they turn to emotional appeals, intuition pumping human or baby, as if that's the same as fetus or person, which is the primary mistake. If not just invoking life straight out as the justification, where this isn't what makes killing immoral. Life is what makes killing killing, but not all killing is immoral. And my partner in this debate also believes that women who are victims of sexual assault should carry to term still. So the argument of sex opens you up to this responsibility doesn't apply to the logic of his argument, because he thinks even those unwilling to engage in sex should still be forced to carry to term if they end up pregnant. So I think that logic largely just boils down to controlling women, what they do with their body, and stripping societal or fundamental rights away from women, which, as stated from the beginning, I think will always lead to a slippery slope of injustice. Now, I guess that was my opening as well. Before I guess we get into a formal back and forth, if there's any direct responses you want to have to my opening, I don't really have any to yours, but I'll give you the floor first if there was any questions or points you want to raise to that.
Yeah, sure. Let's start with the last, kind of one of the last things you said. It was also at the beginning. I wrote it down kind of twice, where you talked about stripping rights as a slippery slope to, I forget exactly the word you used, but basically it leads to bad injustice, I think is the word
Yeah,
that you
injustice.
used. So obviously we've had a little bit of these discussions before. So would you say that, like, I've asked you this before, so I know what your answer is going to be, but for the sake of the video, would you say that in the year 1852 that slavery was a right?
I think it was a societal right. I think it's important to differentiate between societal rights and fundamental rights. It was not a fundamental right, which again, I think they're not equatable because the removal of the right, the societal right to slavery was done so to ensure the fundamental right of self-ownership. So I think comparing that to
Agreed.
removing fundamental rights, like the right to self-ownership with abortion, is kind of flawed logic there.
Okay, so I actually agree, which is why I place so much emphasis on the right to life, because I don't think the right to life, I think that all humans would have it regardless of if America disappeared in 100 years and the Bill of Rights burned up and it still exists. Like I think it's fundamental to being, I would say, as a person. So I would also make that distinction. I guess I would just say that abortion, as it is currently now, as a right, falls under societal rights and not as a fundamental right. There's nothing about existence which gives you the right to end somebody else's. Now, of course, this is where we'll disagree that there's a somebody else that's life is being ended.
I don't disagree there's a
Um,
somebody else really. And I also disagree that it doesn't apply to fundamental rights. I think it applies both to the right of self-ownership and bodily autonomy. What you do with your body is your choice, and that is a fundamental right. Do you believe that bodily autonomy is a fundamental right?
I
Whether or not
do.
whether or not you think it applies to abortion, just first off, I
Yes,
think it's a fundamental right.
I do, and I think both the right to life and bodily autonomy somewhat overlap at points. The reason nobody can kill you is because it's your body and nobody's allowed to do anything to your body. They kind of overlap in that way. Although obviously there's other examples, like you mentioned, victims of sexual assault and other things that can go with bodily autonomy that don't necessarily affect life. But yeah.
So where I think the difference is it's the right of a pregnant person to not be pregnant anymore, because pregnancy is a part of your body. That's why in my opening I said looking at it as the right to end a fetus's life or that. I don't think that's the right way to look at it. It's the right way. The right way to look at it is it's the right of a pregnant person to not be pregnant anymore. And if that so happens to end in a death, that is, you could call it selfish, sure, but you couldn't call it unjust, because that is a fundamental self-right, no more different than you are for if the only way that I could live was your specific heart, I need your heart, and your heart is the only one that will keep me alive, do you think that you're then morally obligated to give me your heart?
Absolutely not. Although I don't think that that in any way is a one-to-one to what's happening
Why
during
not?
pregnancy, for many reasons. One, because we are two independent people with no relationship whatsoever. Of course, there's no reason that I should owe you anything beyond common courtesy as another human, but and vice versa. Whereas the mother and child relationship is fundamentally different, as typically, and I say typically, excluding the cases of assault, the mother and of course the father um, both participate in an activity that gives rise to the fetus in general. So it's kind of a different sort of relationship that has no other.
You mean sex? Them having sex gives rise?
Yes, yeah. There's no other relationship that we can point to that mirrors mother child. There just isn't. It's the only one that's like that. So to look to other relationships is sort of, I don't know if nonsensical is quite the term, but it just doesn't map on the same way. So I would say if you're saying, okay, it's the right to use to end the pregnancy within your own body, then why put, I know you said legislatively, you would put a 20-week ban except for medically necessary abortions, rape victims, etc. Why put a ban on that at all if you just have their own pregnancy?
I think that there's different moral considerations that we give to humans than we give to persons. And I think that the moral considerations that are given to person can supersede things in some cases. And again, I think when it comes to killing, you always have to look at the mitigating circumstances to decide whether it's just or unjust. Some mitigating circumstances like self-defense, for instance, which I mean, you brought up as well, that justifies killing. But then there's obviously other mitigating circumstances where killing would be unjust. So I think it's about looking at not just if there's a life or if killing is happening, happening, because we both agree that there is a life and killing is happening. It's the question is that moral that killing's happening, or is it just or unjustified? And the fact that you invoke right to life, I do kind of want to ask you, or I kind of want to go there first. I have a few questions about that.
Sure.
Do you, and this, I ask questions sometimes to like clear things up. Some people take them as condescending. I don't mean,
Dude, me too.
yeah,
And
don't
people
mean it as condescending
or
at all.
traps. Everyone thinks it's a trap. And I'm like, I
Exactly.
really just am trying to like make sure I understand what you're saying. And they're like, yeah. So you're fine. Ask me anything.
Do you know the difference, or do you understand the difference between a negative right and a positive right?
I believe so, but for purpose of clarity, why don't you just explain how you're using the terms?
Yeah. So negative rights are things you have, and the right itself is given to you with others not interfering with it. You could think of the right to not be stolen from, right? You have property and you have the right, and I'm going to use societal rights. It just makes it easier for examples.
Yeah,
If you have
sure.
property, the right to not be stolen from is a negative right, because people comply with that right by not interfering, by not stealing from you. And
And
then
then positive would be like voting.
voting, yeah, education,
Yeah,
healthcare, even those are positive rights.
yeah,
So when we talk about the right to life, the right to life itself is a negative right. It essentially boils down to the right to not be killed unjustly. That's why, as I said in my opening, if the
agreed.
only way for me to stay alive was for Donald Trump to fly to my house and lay his hand across my forehead, I wouldn't have the right to force him to do that, even if him not doing
Right.
that would lead to me dying. And that's not murder. So the right to life is a negative right. And when it comes to fetuses, it's often applied as a positive right, which, and I wanted to ask you, do you think that fundamental rights across the board should be applied equally, that everyone should have equal fundamental rights, the ones that they have?
Um, Equally to human beings, absolutely.
Yeah.
Um,
So,
and I
so
would
then,
go ahead.
So then my question is, I guess, why do you think, and I heard you say you agree, if the right to life is negative, which means that others comply by not interfering, why does a fetus get this special positive right to life where they have to force someone to comply? Not only are they forcing you to use your body to help them, but they're allowed to encroach on your fundamental rights of self-ownership and bodily autonomy.
Sure. First, on the Donald Trump thing, that's the funniest visual I've ever gotten. I'm gonna lay my head on your forehead. Some say it's the biggest forehead. Others say it's the forehead. It
That's a
just
good
very comical.
interpretation.
Thank you, thank you. But I would say that I reject the premise and the assertion that the fetus is forcing anything. If
Can the
anybody
fetus
is
live on its
forcing,
own
um, depends on when.
at 20 weeks, 19 weeks, 18 weeks?
19 weeks, no,
No,
probably not.
so then the right to life is only given to them by the mother complying by giving them their nutrients, right?
But you say comply like the baby's forcing. I look at it completely the opposite. The mom, and again, in normative circumstances, we can get into assault, I assume, later. In normative circumstances, arguably forced the baby into this situation first. The blame lays with the parents that the baby is in the scenario of existence to begin with, not the other way around. Like the baby was like, you know what? I'm really feeling like I just want to exist right now. Let me just cozy up in this womb. It's their home, it's their natural habitat. They have no choice either way to do anything but to be where they happen to have been created. I wish humans were asexual beings when it comes to reproduction, and then this debate would be nothing. We wouldn't have it, and
Right.
everybody would be cool. But unfortunately, that's just not what nature has. So, from my mind, I say take it up with God, take it up with the universe. I'm not the one who dictated this is how nature works. Like you created a life, and now it's as if I bought a home, created it, forced a homeless person to live into it, and then was like, "Why are you trespassing?" It
I don't
just
think
doesn't
that's the
work like
same.
that.
And to be clear, I guess maybe force isn't the right word. Comply could be a better word, because whether or not you think the fetus is forcing the mom to have the right to life, to have life, so in order to have the right to life, the mom has to comply with the fetus. That means the right itself is given positively.
Yeah, I mean, I just wouldn't look at it as comply. I would look at it as the
What would happen
baby
if she
has the
didn't?
negative right to not be killed by the mother once he or she comes into existence. Him happening to be is irrelevant as far as I'm concerned, because that's just where he has to be.
But that's what differentiates
But
the
I,
type of right that it is.
to a positive right, you would say?
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we might just have to agree to disagree on that issue. I would say it's not a positive. He's not forcing you to do anything. He's preventing you from doing anything. If you don't do anything, the baby just lives and is born.
Okay, so then I guess
That
to
makes
kind
it
of
a negative right.
so then to kind of clear it up, let's say in a hypothetical, you could remove the fetus without killing it. So the mother was
Yes.
just not complying and you just left it on a petri dish, whatever you wanted to leave it on, right?
Yes.
Would you be okay with that?
Um, so I think it would depend on intent. I was actually going to ask you a similar question about this because they have this thing called preterm delivery. I'm sure you've heard of it. They have to do it sometimes when there's a medical situation with the mother or with the baby, and the mother doesn't want an abortion but wants to keep the child if they can. Then they simply induce labor early. Um, I'm not sure if this is why the youngest fetus to ever be born was at 21 weeks or not, but we know that somebody was born at 21 weeks and was able to survive. So around that age, usually is when they're able to survive. But I believe that, um, let's say you're in a medical situation where you just got to deliver, you got to get rid of this baby. I think that the right thing to do is to induce labor, whether that is you're in a situation where that can be natural or whether that has to be cesarean section remains to be seen case by case. And even if it's a 19-week-old fetus, which at this point is not viable, I still think it's within the doctor's duty to do everything in their care to try to save that baby, even though it's never been done. At some point, it had never been done with a 21-week-old fetus as well. So I don't, I, what I, as I described abortion in my definition, you have to have the intent to kill the baby for it to be immoral, which I believe is the vast majority of abortions, which was something else I was going to ask you about on the same topic. If they developed artificial wombs uh, that could carry babies um, at any point, would you outlaw abortions and instead implement either womb transfers, like from one womb to another, or womb transfers to like an artificial womb? Would you be in favor of that?
I think after 20 weeks, I would be fine with that being the preference. I think before 20 weeks, again, it's up to the mother. I don't think that it's necessarily a person, the fetus. I think that the ability or the capacity to have the ability to deploy this conscious experience is what makes you a person, which again, when we grant rights to persons. I think that that's what differentiates it. If you're talking my personal preference, I would say that that would probably be preferred. But I don't think that there would be anything morally unjust prior to 20 weeks that you could look at to say yeeting the fetus instead would be immoral.
Okay. And on the subject of personhood, I guess my issue, I hear a lot of people use the consciousness argument. The streamer Destiny uses it a lot. My problem is that that seems entirely arbitrary, and science seems to indicate that that would allow for infanticide. Um, Little known fact, babies actually don't have consciousness until they're 4 months old. So 1 month old, or let's go to even a 21-week-old preterm, then okay, we can just kill them. They're not persons, they have no moral consideration. So I think it's just arbitrary to select, well, I like consciousness, so that's where I'm gonna say that a person's a person. I think the like you kind of the same argument you were using, that anytime we've said, oh, this person is not a person, whether it be for skin color or whether it be they're not men, they're women, they don't have rights, or whatever the reason is, it's always the oppressors who are using the this blank is not a person language and never the people on the right.
So a couple things, I guess, to address there. I guess it would be arbitrary in the way that you could kind of technically say anything really is arbitrary, or like especially like morality and things like that. But in terms of the thing you said at the end there is generally the problem that has came historically with differentiating humans from persons is when you try to differentiate a person from a human without taking into account the ability to deploy a conscious experience. When, like for slavery, that's the easiest example to go to. When white people were saying that black people could be slaves, it wasn't that you're not a person because you don't have the ability to deploy consciousness. It was you're a
Right, you're
different skin
black.
color than me. Yeah, so you don't have you're not a person. So I think that there's a line in which, yeah, it can become immoral if you're trying to differentiate it off
But what's the
things.
difference, I guess?
A
They
black
just picked
person,
something that they liked.
a black person will never become white, and a fetus will develop the ability to deploy a conscious experience. That's the core difference. There's nothing a black person could do in that situation to then become a person, but a fetus can develop into a person. That would be the core difference. And then the other thing that I want to get to, that what you said at the beginning, where babies who are born don't have consciousness, it's about the capacity to deploy it. It's not just having consciousness itself, because then you could just say when someone's asleep or when someone's in a coma that they're not a person either. But that's when you go to sleep, when you're in a coma, when you wake up, you're back into the same conscious experience. You're going to be the same person. You have the same memories, the same everything. A fetus before 20 weeks does not have that capacity. Like I said, I don't have it's like thalamocortical connections in the cortex, which gives you the ability. And it's like a range, kind of like how you see with puberty, where puberty is onset at different places. You know, you can't pinpoint exactly when someone's going to have puberty, but the scientific consensus is that those thalamocortical connections cannot be developed prior to 20 weeks, which is why, for me personally, I would legislatively place it at 20 weeks to be sure that anyone that, like, at any point it develops, whether it's 20 weeks, whether it's 30 weeks, they're going to fall in that range of protections.
So, I mean, I would still say that it's it's more defined than the black people, white people debate for sure. But I would still say it's arbitrary. Like you said, people have trouble when they start saying stuff like skin color or whatever, because there's just not actually anything to like base that off of. But I would say one thing that is consistent is being a human being. So why not apply it to the place that covers everyone? Then there's no question. If you're a human, you're a person. You got rights. That covers everybody. There could never be anybody who could ever argue against any particular group of people for any reason, because there have been people who are born with severe brain damage who their families stop the doctors from aborting them and save the babies, but they're not conscious. They don't have consciousness. Unfortunately, some of them die pretty young at 11 or 12 or whatever, but they are able to live a life as a member of the family despite not having consciousness. So, under your view, we could just get rid of that guy. He doesn't have any moral worth. Under my view, he's protected because he's a human being. So my view seems to cover the most bases and to commit the least amount of atrocities possible as far as it pertains to protecting people's right to life, whereas just choosing consciousness for the vibes isn't really a good enough
So I guess
distinction, in my opinion.
the question that I would pose is, do you think that ending end of life care, let's say there's a situation where you know for sure that the person will never come off the machine, they'll never be able to deploy that conscious experience again. Do you think that it's unjust to end of life care in that situation? Like, let's say specifically somebody's 25 and we know they'll never come off the machines, like they'll never have that conscious experience again, but the machines can keep them alive from 25 to 85. Are we morally incumbent to keep that person alive on the machines?
So I would say no, and a couple of things on
Why?
that. I would say,
Why? Why would be my question.
well, I'm about to say, so a couple of things on that. The main reason why I would say no is because there will never be a future conscious experience, whereas with a fetus, it's a reasonable expectation that it will arise. And you mentioned capacity earlier, as although a newborn baby fresh out the womb, literally minutes old, um, won't have consciousness, he still has the capacity. So how are you defining capacity? Because at that point, I would just say, sure, he's got the body parts, but it's not actually happening. So capacity only that it's within his nature as a human to have consciousness, and I would think that would apply to a fetus too, because as soon as the egg and the sperm combine, the entire genetic code is written to the point where we can actually look at a zygote, read the DNA, and tell you how tall the baby will be before it's ever born.
Sure, but
And what foods it'll like.
you could still read the DNA of a person who's stuck on a machine and will never come off of the machine. I define the capacity scientifically. It's in the cortex when there's thalamocortical connections that are formed through the dendrites and axons, synapses begin firing throughout the brain. This is what allows the ability to have a conscious experience, and the consensus is that this cannot be formed any earlier than 20 weeks.
I agree, but that being formed is
So
a
once you
part
have
of
that,
the
once you have those, you have the capacity. Whether they're not working, whether they are working,
right.
that's different, but you have the capacity. If you have all the parts to build a car, you have the capacity to have a car, whether or not it's all put together as a car.
Sure. And I would say that once the zygote is created in its DNA, it has the capacity
But it doesn't.
to create its
It doesn't.
brain to grow all of that.
It will have that. Yeah, to grow implies that it doesn't have it yet.
Yeah, it doesn't have a brain yet, but it
Yeah,
has
so then it's not a
it
person.
has all of the necessary information to develop capacity or to develop consciousness.
Yeah,
That's what
and
I'm saying.
develop.
Yeah, it doesn't
Is the
have.
key
Yeah, I
word.
don't care about consciousness though. Consciousness
Yeah,
is
well,
irrelevant to me.
I'm explaining from my point of view is the difference is the develop that implies that it doesn't yet. And I think
Sure,
having
and
the
I would agree.
ability itself is what provides it. I do want to jump over because I feel like we could go in circles with this the whole hour. Because you said sex opens you up to the responsibility of, or gives the fetus more rights, or however you put it. And I don't think I think that's a bit logically fallacious. I don't think that logic could really be applied in other scenarios. I think that engaging in an act that could result in X outcome doesn't justify X outcome, or you accepting X outcome, right? Because sex is an act that can be done without the purpose of reproduction, and in most cases doesn't. Also, like, people have sex every single day. People aren't getting pregnant and having babies every single time they have sex. So, like, for drinking, for instance, this is another one. People drink all the time. Sometimes you drink, you can die. So do you then think that if somebody drinks and they're going to die, that they shouldn't have a right to intervene?
No, to clarify my bringing that up, it was just to combat the idea that somehow this is the fetus's fault or the fetus is. I was just saying, if anything, which I would argue it's just an automatic process that is happening, which is the pregnancy, and it's neither the mother's fault that she brought somebody into existence, nor the baby's fault for being brought into existence. I was just simply rebutting it's the baby with, well, if it had to be placed on anybody, it certainly wouldn't be the baby. I wasn't arguing that I actually would use that argument that the mom, it's her fault she had sex. She purposefully created. I mean, you have no idea if you're going to be pregnant or not when you have
So
sex, even if you're trying. So
what's your argument then that justifies the fetus getting a positive right to life, whereas it's negative to everyone else?
like I said, I reject the framing that it's positive. I would just say it's negative, as in if I don't do
Well, it's
anything.
inherently positive. If you can't have it without other people like helping you have it, it's a positive right. And the fetus
But the mom,
literally can't
I
live.
would argue the mom isn't helping you have it any more than she's just living her life. She's just eating food and
But she is.
existing.
The fetus wouldn't be alive without the mother.
Automatic, yes, without the mother's body, it's
So
an
it's
automatic process.
yeah,
It's not
so
like
it's
the
a
mom is
positive
like,
right.
I would
Because
say
it
it's an
needs the
automatic.
mother's body. It needs the mother's body to have that right. That makes it a positive right.
I disagree. I would say that it's in the mother's body, and if the mom does nothing, then nothing will happen to it, and it'll just continue to live,
Well,
and that
yeah,
makes it
because
a negative right. She doesn't have the right to interfere
doing
with
nothing would
its
be
life.
complying. To be clear, doing nothing would be complying.
Complying with what? With reality?
Her body is still giving the fetus nutrients if she does nothing.
Correct. It's an automatic process,
Right.
pregnancy, to where the
Well, it being
body.
automatic doesn't make it negative or positive. Needing something to have that right is what makes it positive. I don't know if maybe you're just misunderstanding the difference.
Sure. I must have. Okay, so then I would say, then yeah, I'll concede on that it's a positive right if you want to categorize it that way.
So then why do fetuses get the positive right where it's negative to everyone else? If you
Yeah, I
yourself
would.
also said that fundamental rights should be applied equally across the board, why is it different in this scenario?
So I would use the thing that I said earlier about trying to apply this to anyone else is just it's a failed hypothesis. Mother and child is a unique relationship that no other two beings have together. It's a unique situation,
So
is
then
what
you
I would
don't
say.
think that fundamental rights should be equal across the board?
If I don't think that the fundamental right should be positive or negative across the board, but it should be applied to everyone equally, as far as everyone should have it, if that made sense.
Sure, sure. I have another hypothetical that I want to engage in. This kind of gets more to sexual assault and things like that. If you, let's say, you get kidnapped, they drug you, whatever, you pass out, and when you wake up, you're in a room with a violinist, and the violinist has a fatal kidney disorder, and you guys are connected by some machine. A doctor comes in and he tells you, hey, I'm terribly sorry, I don't know who kidnapped you, I wouldn't have let them kidnap you, they were wrong to kidnap you, but now that you're here, now that you're connected to this violinist, he has to be connected to you to live, so to unplug you would be to kill them. Do you think you're morally incumbent? And you have to stay connected to them for 9 months. Do you think you're then morally incumbent to stay connected to that violinist?
Yeah, I'll let you say the whole thing for the audience. I'm familiar with the violinist one, obviously. Yeah, I don't think that this maps on to the situation at all. Once
Why?
again, the scenario with mother and child is not the same. Are you the one who kidnapped the person and attached them to you and then said, I've attached it to you so that this is the only way that you live? But also, how dare we be attached? I'm going to kill you now. It's just not the same.
Okay,
Like,
well, I have, oh, hold
you
on.
have to keep in mind that the mom is the reason in some views why this is a situation to begin with,
Okay,
whereas in the example you had, it's outside force, so it doesn't map on.
hold on, because I don't think that's really logically consistent either. Then are you saying if the only way for me to live would be for my mom's heart, my mom specifically has to give me her heart, is she then morally obligated to give me her heart?
No, it's not the same. Again,
How? It's the mother son, that's my mom, she's the only reason I'm here. It's the same
yeah,
situation.
but she's not the reason you're in that particular scenario.
You froze for a
I'm
second.
saying the reason. Oh, did you hear anything I said? Should I repeat?
I heard particular scenario. I'm assuming you said
Oh, okay,
wasn't
yeah,
the
I'll,
same.
I'll run it back. I said, in the instance of being created, life arising, a zygote, um, if you want to put responsibility on anyone, as I said, it's an automatic process, so I think that's a category error to begin with. But if blame must be assigned, I don't think we can put it with the fetus. I think the only person to blame is the mother and the father for doing something that makes life arise. The reason I use arise is because, again, you can't really intentionally, you can try to, but even when you're intending to have a baby, it doesn't really work that way. So that's how life arose. Whereas somebody just kidnapping you, or you just being sick and your mom needing to take care of you, or by giving you a heart transplant, is just not the same scenario. Do
So
you
if
see what I mean?
what if I was born with a heart disorder? So the only reason I have the heart disorder is because my mom had sex. She gave life to me. So it's completely on my mom. Is she then morally incumbent to give me her heart?
Well, I still wouldn't say that's the only reason. The reason you have a heart defect is because there was a mistake with the copying of your DNA.
Right. And
So
and and why was my
that's why I
DNA
said
copied? Why was my DNA copied?
why or
Yeah.
how.
Why? Or how? I mean, whatever. Because my mom and dad had sex, right? That's what I'm trying to get to.
Kind of. So, like I said, you can't really. That's why I think that this is a category error to begin with, is because you can't really blame the parents. It's just if somebody has to have the blame. That's why I say take it up with God. This is not a anybody can be blamed. Life is just here now. And now the question is, what rights does this life have?
So how is that any different if it's how is that any different than a fetus needing the mother's nutrients and the mother then being morally incumbent to give them those nutrients? How is that any different than me
I
being
think the mother is morally incumbent to not uh, kill the fetus and to let the natural process continue, not to do anything specific. As I said, she's just living life. I mean, she eats food, does what, like, she doesn't have to, she's not doing anything to give, like, willfully, like carrying over a bunch of nutrients to the baby. It's not like that. The mother and the baby both donate cells to create the placenta so that the nutrients can be transferred. Both of them do it automatically. So their bodies are it's possible for a woman's body to go against her conscious will. I mean, an example of this is when you get cancer, or when you really, when you get any sort of autoimmune sickness or anything like that where the body's attacking itself. It's possible for your body to go against your mental or your conscious will. Um, and that's more of how I would frame this, rather than any of the individuals actually doing this, if that makes sense.
If the mother
Um,
doesn't eat or digest the correct nutrients needed, like food or water, whatever it is, you know, to keep the fetus alive, would the fetus live in her body still?
I mean, assumably they would both die. I would assume,
The
if
fetus
she
would
didn't eat.
probably die long before the mother.
That might be true. I'm not sure.
So
I would say they probably
in
both
that
die.
situation, doesn't it kind of show that the mother does indeed have to do something? She can't just do nothing. Like, it's not her literally
Yeah, but she
nothing.
has to do that for her own sake, just to eat and drink water, or else
But
she's going to become ill.
but if she just didn't eat or drink long enough, the fetus died, and then she fed herself, is that
Well, I'm not sure
right or
that
wrong?
that's actually. I'm not sure that that's actually the case. I would need to see. I've never entertained the idea that a mom would stop eating, and so I don't know if the fetus dies first, or how much sooner the fetus dies, or this is all conjecture at that point. But um, yeah, I mean, for me, it comes down to, once a unique human exists, I don't think bodily autonomy applies any more to the mother than it does to the baby. And it's a tricky situation as the two are combined. And I don't think that them being combined makes one of them not a person. And I'll cite I forget the one lady's name, but Abby and her sister, they're conjoined twins. They're very famous, especially recently because they got married. I'm sure you saw all the memes. I would still say there's two people there. I think if we go with well, they're attached and she's got to do something to keep the other alive. Do you think that the sister has the moral obligation to not kill herself? Because if she kills herself, then her sister's going to die.
I don't know enough about conjoined twins to like know like if the sister just dies. Aren't they? Which if don't they have like two different like heads, two different brains, two different all of that stuff?
Different on most things. Their arms and obviously their legs and stuff. They just have,
But
I
they have
guess,
like
one
two
each.
brains, right? They each have their own brain.
They do have two brains.
So then
I
they'd be
don't
two different people.
think. Yeah, they are two
They're each
different
having
people.
their own conscious experience.
I agree. So that's why I'm asking if one of them wants to. I don't know if you want me to say self delete for YouTube, but if one of
Yeah.
them needs to self delete, or wants to
Would
self
that
delete,
kill
not
the other
needs
one?
to,
I don't
sorry.
know how that works. Like if
My understanding is that it does, based off another set of twins that this happened to. One of them died, and the other one died very shortly after as a result,
then I
because
would find that
they're
unjust. I would find that unjust because I would consider them both people. They're both having a conscious experience. They both have the ability and the capacity to deploy their own conscious experience. So if one of them did an act that would end the other's conscious experience, I mean, obviously, if they self-deleted, they couldn't be tried. But I think that would constitute
right, right.
that
But
would constitute
morally, they
murder, in
would be
my opinion.
culpable.
Yeah, yeah.
Sure. Okay, so then it just comes down to personhood, which I don't know how to proceed with this, because my argument is obviously just that the only logical place to draw the line without causing issues is being a human being, and anything else is arbitrary and just based off of personal whim.
Do you think that when somebody dies, you know, like obviously when the conscious experience ends, I'll say, because when somebody's an organ donor, they have to keep the body alive in terms of keeping their organs functioning in an organized manner, like systemically to keep things pumping, blood and stuff to remove organs. Do you think that's immoral because they're still a human and they're still a life, or do you think that there's a different moral value placed on them then?
Sorry, what are you asking me? If to keeping them alive is moral,
To
or
remove their
taking their organs
to take
or
their or I
organs?
guess the person I what I mean to ask is when somebody the conscious experience is over but they're kept alive to remove their organs, do you think that a different moral value is placed on that person then?
like for right to life, or I guess which moral question, like what's happening that's moral and immoral in this situation? I guess I'm trying to figure out. I might be
Well, like for
misunderstanding.
instance, removing organs from somebody who had a conscious experience from
But
years.
they're an organ donor, right?
Yeah,
You said they were an organ donor, so I mean they already consented.
yeah, I guess, but like that's the I guess the root of the question is like there's a different moral value placed on them.
Well, I would say, again, much I like you said, I mean, they're already organ donors, so I don't think that there's an issue, even if they did have the same. But the reason that a person who will never wake up again is because they will never have a conscious experience, not because they haven't had one yet. Those are two different things. One is I've had conscious experience and I'm never going to have it again. And one is I'm going through the process to develop my conscious experience, and you want to interrupt the process so that I never get there.
So
Two
if
different
someone's
things.
so let's say someone's on a machine and you don't know if they'll wake up or not. Do you think at any point there is justification to end of life care?
What do you mean by I don't know?
Well,
To what degree do we not know? Like
with
it's
most
like a
people you don't
50-50
know.
coin toss?
Yeah,
Or
50-50 coin toss. Like with most, I feel like I mean, I know it differs in different scenarios, but in plenty of
sure.
scenarios, they can't give you a hard line, yes, they'll wake up, or a hard line, no, they won't. So, like, at what point, after 5 years, after 10 years, after 50 years, at any point, no point, when do you think, what do you think
Yeah.
about justification of that?
So I think that when you end up, and I wanted to bring this up earlier, but it's okay, we're jumping around. When it comes to you being in a coma, for instance, your guardianship and how do you I forget what they call it exactly. Essentially, your family
Next of
members
kin.
become, yeah, they become the decision makers for you. And I think that that's the best case scenario that we can hope for
Why?
at that point, because we can't get any information from you as to whether or not you would actually like to stay alive. So we have to trust that the people in your life know you well enough to know you better keep me on this damn machine for at least 20 years, or you better not let me live like a fucking vegetable for 20 years, you idiot.
So why is that different
Um,
from a fetus where you can't get the answer from them? You don't know if they're going to have the conscious experience or not. Like, how does that morally different?
sure. So, and we'll see how this goes, because I like that you took it here, because I've been having a lot of arguments the last 2 weeks to prepare for this, especially on Reddit, with pro-choicers, just trying to take it to new places, because obviously the debate gets kind of repetitive after a while. There's only so much. So you're actually taking it to a place where I haven't thought of answers. So I'm working this out in real time as you're asking me. But I would say, with the baby, all organisms desire to the point where if you don't, you're sick, you're suicidal, you're depressed, and we have medication where we try to stop you from killing yourself, because it's not right for you to not desire to continue to live. It's an innate evolutionary trait that has allowed us to evolve over the millions and billions of years as organisms, is the desire to life. So I think the default assumption is, to assume that they want to live. And the reason that this doesn't apply at the end of life care is because you've known this person, you've talked to them, assumably, I hate that word. You would assume that you've had conversations about uh, what they want to do. Like, when I die, I don't really want to be in a casket. I think it's a waste of money. I would rather be cremated and buried with a tree. Like, I've had that conversation with my wife, and I'm only in my 20s. So you, I think the best we can do is err on the side of, what the family members think that the individual would want, whereas I think we just err on the side of life for the fetus, because we haven't had a chance to ask them yet. They can't
Yeah,
consent either way.
I think it's because there's a different moral value placed on people who don't have the ability to deploy a conscious experience, and that's why we would defer to people who do have the ability to deploy a conscious experience. I also think that, bringing it back to organ donors, I think this is why we allow people to be organ donors once they don't have the ability to deploy a conscious experience anymore, even when they consent. But we don't let somebody who consents to assisted self-delete, we'll say, we don't let doctors allow them, we don't allow doctors to then help them with that, because there's a different moral value placed on those deploying a conscious experience from those who
Wait,
don't.
did you just say we don't allow doctors to do assisted self-deletion?
Mhm.
I actually think that we should allow that. That could potentially be another debate for another time, but I think that that should absolutely be allowed. And in fact, this is sort of different, but one of the few things that I like that Trump did was he passed a law or a bill or something that had the right to try, which gave people who, you know, you have 3 months to live or whatever, the right to try any medication, even if it's experimental, because I think you have the right to do with your body and your life whatever you want to. I may disagree personally on what I would do. I wouldn't self-delete pretty much ever, but I think you have the right to do so. I don't see what right we have. And along that same lines, you know, you have to have the donor thing on your ID so that they know that they can take your organs. Aside from the fact that it affects family members who are still living, I see absolutely nothing wrong with taking organs from a dead person. I don't see why they have to consent. They're not alive. They have no rights. They're not people. They're dead. I don't think it's a problem. The only reason that it is a thing is because, obviously, as somebody who has dead family members, if somebody starts grave robbing, it's not going to be good vibes for me. So it's affecting me. But if I wasn't in the picture, I can't see a moral justification for why we can't do it.
So I guess the purpose I bring that up is because societally we view those as two different things, even though in both circumstances the person is consenting. And I think that it just shows how societally, at least, we place different moral values on a conscious experience, personhood from a life, or just a human being. But we are getting close to when we got to get to closings. And there is one more thing I did want to bring up, which pertains to moral values and placing them, which I want to ask just clarifying questions. Do you think that a fetus should have the same moral values as a child, a baby, someone who's been born?
I mean, it's a vague question, but generally I'd say yes.
Okay, do you think that abortion, like in your worldview, do you think that abortion constitutes murder?
Um, on the part of whom?
Like the person carrying out the abortion?
The doctor?
I mean, you could place it anywhere. I mean, the doctor, the mom, that
Well,
doesn't
it
matter as much to
matters.
me.
It
I,
matters a lot to
well,
me
not to the point I'm trying to
because,
make is what I'm saying. Like, as
oh,
long as you
sure.
constitute it murder for someone, is somebody committing murder in that situation?
I think it sort of depends on what the person knows.
What do you mean
I
by?
think I think that society has done a bang up job of convincing everybody that it's not, to the point that almost nobody is morally culpable for doing so because they don't
Well,
they know I'm not Christian per se, but the Lord forgive them for they know not what they do. They don't. I don't blame the pro-choicers. I don't think you guys are a bunch of. I think you guys are trying to protect women,
Well, I mean,
and I'm trying to protect
in
babies.
your worldview, where everyone in society hypothetically buys into it, and the same moral values are placed on a
Like
fetus, a
they know they're
baby,
killing a whole baby.
they know, like everybody agrees with you,
Well, then of
the
course, I mean it's
worldview.
infanticide at that point.
Okay, so then in your worldview, this is one of the problems that I have with pro-life, where if we're placing the same moral values on these things, if abortion constitutes murder, I don't understand how miscarrying, the person miscarrying couldn't be open to being charged with manslaughter in different ways. Like, for instance, like this scenario, right? Let's say there's a single mom, so she lives alone, she has to do everything herself. Let's say she's running up the stairs, specifically running, matters to this scenario. She's running up the stairs
Yep.
to
She
grab
trips.
something. She trips, she
Yep.
falls, she
Yep.
miscarries. How is that any different than somebody, let's say in Montana, where texting while driving is legal, somebody looks
Yep.
at their phone while they're driving?
That's crazy.
Yeah,
That's
it's legal in
legal.
2 states. Yeah, it's legal in 2 states. Montana is one. So
That's wild.
somebody looks at their phone while they're driving in Montana and accidentally hits someone
That's
while they're crossing
crazy.
the street. That's involuntary manslaughter. How is the act of the mother in that situation, where she
Sure.
acting recklessly and could cause harm to a life. How is that not? How would that not constitute, or would it?
Sure. Well, this is partially why I'm not super interested in society or laws or whatever, because I don't think laws map onto morality all of the time. For example, I think lying, and as I define it, lying is keeping information from somebody who deserves to have the information, is wrong. I don't think we can enshrine that into law because it's not practical. So I don't think that it would make sense to ever make that a law, but I do think that that's an immoral action, but doesn't correspond to the law. So I actually think there's absolutely no moral culpability for accidental death. I think there's nothing wrong with it besides somebody died and it's unfortunate, but if it's an accident, then it's an accident. I don't think that that person should go to jail. I don't think that person should be punished. I don't think anything like that. So this example, I wouldn't punish that person for something that they had no intention of doing. I think that's wrong.
Well, I think that that's kind of just logically inconsistent with your position, though, because if the position is that abortion is murder because it's ending a life that has the same moral value as any other life, then that would have to be involuntary manslaughter. That's the only way it could be looked
I
at.
mean, it's involuntary manslaughter. I just don't think we should do anything legally or that's wrong.
So then what about in a more, and this is like, I know you said it's not your stance, so I won't dive too deep into it, but what about a more direct scenario, like a woman works in a dangerous job or a high stress job, you can say like construction or something, and she doesn't quit her job after finding out she's pregnant, and an accident happens at work and the baby dies. Would you consider that in the same grounds? Would you consider that negligent? I messed up the words too many times. Yeah, negligent homicide. I guess I can't say that word. I just figured that out. I don't know.
It's okay. I can't say assume, whatever.
Yeah,
I just say assume at this point.
right.
Yeah, I mean, I would probably say similar to the manslaughter. I just don't think. I think for killing to be wrong, it has to be my goal is to kill this person. Otherwise, I don't think it's immoral. It's a tragedy, of course, as I value life to an extremely high degree, even probably above some of my pro-life homies. But I just don't think you can blame the person for something that they did not intend to do. That just doesn't seem to make sense to me. I know we are running out of time, but I did want to ask that about morality. Do you think that morality is subjective or objective? Because I think that that plays a large part in this conversation as well. I personally find that I think morality is objective. I just don't think that we will ever be able to access all of what is right or wrong. Like, I don't think humans have the ability to know all of it, if that
Yeah,
makes sense.
that kind of maps on more to like epistemology, and that's a really philosophical type of topic or whatever. I think morality is subjective because I don't think that there's any act that you could really give that is objectively moral. I think that there is a way to make it moral. Like,
You wouldn't say murder
what if
as defined by
yeah,
the legal
so
system?
what if you murdered one person to keep 100 people from being murdered? Would that be immoral?
I think so. You probably wouldn't, I guess.
I wouldn't know.
I mean, do you know, like, so what do you like? He's charging at him to kill him because I would call that defense. But if you're just saying like
No.
they're
Like, let's
just a
say,
murderer and you
yeah,
kill them while they're like drinking a coffee,
like
yeah,
there's
I
just
think that's
it's just a
immoral.
hypothetical situation. I don't really know, I guess, in the heat of the moment, how to
Sure.
paint it
I
out
just
real
needed
well.
to know if they're actively about to kill somebody or if they just are a killer. You know that they
The person you kill isn't the
are
killer.
planning it.
Isn't the killer. You could murder one innocent person,
Oh,
or if you
it's
don't
just a.
murder that person, 100 innocent people will be murdered. Do you
Oh,
think
okay.
murder in that situation would be moral or immoral?
Okay, I see. So it's just a random person. I was thinking it was the perpetrator.
Yeah, no, random on both
Um,
sides,
okay, so random individual,
or 100
a
random individuals.
bunch of random individuals, and
I
let's
would say
assume
it's
like,
immoral not to murder in that situation because then you're causing the death of 100 innocent people.
yeah, I mean, potentially, I would still say, I don't know. I guess I would need more information about the hypothetical, but that's a hypothetical. What are you going to do?
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's immoral, but it might be the most moral option available, which is objective morality. Like, I think that there is what is the objective best thing to do morally in a scenario
Sure.
at any given point. We just might not know what the answer is. So I wouldn't blame a person. Like, I wouldn't be like, you monster, if they chose one way or the other in that scenario, because I think it's somewhat of an impossible. I mean, it's the trolley cart
So I think in
situation.
a
It's like,
situation where you have two immoral actions, I would consider doing the less immoral action moral. And I guess to be completely clear on my stance, I think that morality, I think there's like a socially defined morality, which is more, it's still subjective to that society, but it's like objective to those in the society. Obviously, murder is immoral in our society. Cannibalism, I guess, is a better example. Cannibalism is immoral in our society, but then there's entire societies that eat people, right? So I think there's that kind of morality, which is kind of more objective, but still subjective to the different like cultures. And then I think there's like personal morality, which I think is completely subjective. I don't think there's any way to really just base right or wrong. If you pull from God, like a lot of people will try to say objective morality is defined through God, through religion. But then I guess the quarrel is if two people come to a disagreement, but both come from a religious point and can pull scriptures or whatever to back their
right.
position, how do you ever define who's right or wrong in that situation, right? Which I don't know. I don't
Yeah.
know how religious you are or whatnot.
My family is Catholic. We'll say
Okay.
that. My
Yeah.
family is extremely Catholic. So, but I would say, yeah, even with, it depends if you're talking colloquially or sort of philosophically with objective and subjective, because I take objective and subjective to mean coming from a subject or coming from an object, like not coming from in a mind.
I
So I
think,
think
yeah.
even if morality came from God, that's just the ultimate subjective morality. Like, that's just God's opinion. Why do I care? Like, you know what I mean? So I don't think that's objective either. I think it would have to be like, is it exists separate from minds, that like it wasn't a mind who decided this, it just is this way. I think morality arises from evolution, and I think that you can look at it, I'll use religious language to make it easier, but I'll say you can imagine the best case scenario for every single person who's alive all happening at once. That's heaven. The
Mhm.
worst case scenario, everyone's in cages, we're all starving, every single person that could ever be, even the babies in the wombs are in cages in the wombs. Like, it's all bad for everyone. That's hell.
Mhm.
Anything that moves us towards this is immoral, just objectively, because I'm, as the term, if the words have any meaning whatsoever, it means that it means the worst or the best and the worst. And so I think that that's innate in our DNA. That's just arisen, and it doesn't come from a mind. I think it's just baked into it's like consciousness. It's just an emergent property of humans. That's why I think it's objective. I just don't think we have a way of knowing what every single point on that.
Yeah, I
Sam
just,
Harris
so
calls
what
it
were you
the
saying?
valleys. Oh,
Yeah.
Sam Harris calls it the valleys and the mountains. I don't know if we can track every point on the valleys and the mountains, but I think some of it's pretty obvious, like slitting the throat of a baby and throwing him off a roof. Come on, like that's not objective. I mean, subjective. Like, there's, I don't care who you are. You tell me that's good. It's just not. It's not good.
Well, I guess I would just pose the same because I think it's situationally
Sure, you would.
defined. I would just the same
I
scenario.
do
If
too.
you did that to
I
one
just
to
think
stop it from happening to 100,
I agree. I just think in that situation there is a right answer. You may not know it,
Yeah,
but there
yeah,
is a right. That's
but
why it's objective.
it
We
pertains
just
to
can't
the
access it.
situation. It pertains to the situation.
Exactly.
Like I think
Situation.
just
Yes.
because X is moral in Y situation doesn't mean it's going to be moral in Z, A, B, C
Yes.
situations.
That I agree with. So I guess if that, I would call that more like universal. I don't think morality is universal necessarily, but I
Mhm.
think it's objective. Like, I think it's a fact that um in most scenarios there's no justification for slitting of a baby's throat. That's just not a
Yeah, I would
thing.
agree.
Like you said, potentially if there's, okay, well then I'm going to slit five babies' throats if you don't let me slit this. They're like,
Yeah.
yeah, but at that point maybe it's just a wash. It's just inaction because both are bad.
So
But
yeah, I mean,
anyways,
we
let's
we
wrap this
probably
up.
are closer to agreeing on
Yeah,
that than
yeah,
disagreeing. So I just
yes.
want to say, first off, fuck Sam Harris. Just gonna leave that here. Fuck everything Sam Harris is about. We are at like
Everything? I'm curious on that. We'll have to talk about that in
yeah.
DMs later.
Just DM me. We could talk about Sam. But maybe not every. I don't know everything about it. But
Alright.
fuck Sam
Yeah.
Harris as an overall statement. But yeah, we are at like an hour. If you want to go ahead and hit your
Oh
closing,
yeah,
I can hit
close up.
mine. Yep.
Yeah, closing like I did with my opening. I'll just say thanks for having me on. This has been fun. I think probably there's a lot that we could have, excuse me, talked about that we didn't get to. I have like a whole page of points that
I do
I didn't
too.
even touch on
Yeah.
because as I kind of figured, I knew we would kind of get stuck on one or two sub things within the greater conversation. So if this does well on your channel, we've had a lot of feedback already about including women in these discussions. I don't know if my wife in particular would want to go on camera, but I did have some people based off of our public exchanges DM me as women asking to be a part of the conversation on both sides. Actually, I had pro-choicers and pro-lifers be like, I would absolutely love to be on there, and I'm like, it's not my show, but I'll talk to them
Just
if it goes
quickly, yeah.
well. So
Find one
yeah,
from both sides. I'd love to do it.
yeah, that's what I'd love to do, even if it's like I'm not on and they're just on. That's cool. Or if you want to do like a partner thing, I'd
Yeah.
love to be on. But as far as abortion is concerned, I'll just kind of quickly go over my syllogism again for anybody who doesn't remember my main argument, and then I'll give the floor to you. Give me 1 second here. Just got to pull it back up. So again, premise one, all human beings have the right to life. Premise two, violating a human's right to life is immoral. Premise three, a human fetus is a human being. Conclusion, therefore, violating a fetus's right to life is immoral. And that kind of just sums up my argument. So with that, I yield my time and thanks for having me.
You're fine. Yeah, again, thank you. I guess to close here, I'll go quickly as well because we are a bit over. My position mainly, the problem that I have with the pro-life position is I believe they apply the right to life in a way that isn't applied to anyone else, where to everyone else, it's a negative right. For fetuses, it has to be a positive right. And I think that fundamental rights should be applied the same throughout the board. And also, I don't believe that invoking the right to life or life itself, it's kind of begging the question to say that that makes something murder or that makes something immoral. A life being a life or a life being ended is what makes killing, but it doesn't make killing immoral because not all killing is immoral. There's self-defense, there's ending end-of-life care, there's killing in war, there's different situations with mitigating circumstances that justify or unjustify murder. So I don't think just invoking it as a life being ended makes something unjust. And when it comes to pro-life, again, I just think it boils down to a lot of logical inconsistencies that don't really hold up in other circumstances. Not as much for my partner, but for other people, I believe that this could lead to a slippery slope of other kind of injustices where like now, and I know, again, don't want to attribute any positions to you that you don't have, but for other people, like with now in plenty of states where IVF is under fire, funding for contraceptions is under fire. So I believe the right to self, the right to bodily autonomy is something worth protecting. It's something that I hope I did a good job protecting in this debate and something I will always defend. I am a staunch defender of fundamental rights. And yeah, again, just thank you for joining the channel. I appreciate you. And if you guys like this, let us know in the comments. Like we said, we'll do round two. Maybe we'll include a female for both sides, do a partner thing, switch it up somehow.
All right. Yeah. Thanks for having me, man.
Yeah, see ya, my man.
Peace out.
It was a pleasure.